If someone doesn't see themselves as somebody who makes $500,000 a year, they won't.
Life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you.
There are people out there that are doing everything that you want to do that are less talented than you. And the only reason that they're doing it and you're not is just because they have the courage to do it. Imagine you planted a seed in a garden and then you stood over it with a bullhorn and yelled at it every day, like, why aren't you growing? Like, you should be bigger, you should be stronger, you should be taller. Look at those other trees over there, they grew already. Like, what, you know what I mean? And then I did something that I never did before, is I picked up the phone and I called the author. I didn't realize he was like a licensed psychotherapist, so he called me back.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Synergy 805 podcast. I'm super excited. Today we have Aaron Novello. He is so special to me in many ways. This man is in real estate. He's also in real estate coaching. Has sold over 2,000 homes in his career. Coaches about 100 coaching clients at a time. He is I feel like a psychotherapist in many ways. He's moved mountains in my mind to help free me up. This year he's gotten me up 50% in my business. So if you're an entrepreneur out there, I would definitely listen in. This man will change your life. He will change your business. I'm super excited. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you, brother, and excited to be here.
I appreciate you beyond understanding, for sure. I remember when I first started coaching with you, that was probably about a year and a half ago now. I was lost in life at that point. I was in some toxic relationships and my business was suffering because of it. I got introduced to Jose Luis Morales, who showed me the path, basically what to say and how to say it as far as scripts go to increase my business. But what I've realized is that business is 80% psychology and 20% mechanics. So I started getting the mechanics, but what you did for me is really help me understand what was going on personally in my mind. So can you elaborate specifically kind of what you worked me through from the beginning and then kind of how that transpired into today?
Yeah, so I'm aware that we can only behave in accordance with the way that we see ourselves. And when we initially connected, you saw yourself in a very particular way, based on previous experiences that you had, based on perhaps your family of origin. Some things that you didn't have too much choice over. Individuals had kind of shared with you and passed down to you perhaps thoughts that they had about you and what you were capable of. And you also, with a tiny mind that wasn't fully developed yet, had come to some conclusions and gave some meanings to things that weren't actually in alignment with what was true. And so I remember being on a call with you and you sharing with me that you had this belief up until that point that because, perhaps you came from parents who, did substances, while you were in the womb sort of thing, that affected your cognitive ability or your ability to learn things. And you said to me multiple times, perhaps sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, like, I'm not smart. And I'm aware that if you said that to me out loud, then you've said it to yourself like a million times. And my brain can't tell the difference between if something's like factually correct in the material world or if it's just something that I'm imagining, right? It experiences both as though they're true. So I would just point that out to you. So like, hey, I'm noticing that your choice of words, right? And life and death is in the tongue. So I can either breathe something to life with words, or I can tear it down with words. And in the moment, what you're doing is, without being cognizant or aware of it, is you're tearing yourself down with those words. So where did you get that idea? Like, why do you believe that that is true? And I believe that was the first time you ever actually stopped to examine that belief to see if it was factually correct and factually true. And then you started to self-discover, like, hey, wait a minute, like, I can learn, I can read books, and like I'm totally capable. And then what began to transpire is you began to change the way that you see yourself. And that's the main thing. So in other words, I see so many people get lost in like podcasts about discipline or about consistency, or they read all these books like Atomic Habits, which is, I mean, it's a book. I'm aware though it's not like new information. And they really have a hard time trying to figure out why they're not doing something consistently over an extended period of time. And I believe the main reason is because it's not in alignment with the way that they see themselves. So in other words, like if you see yourself as a healthy person, which I know you do and you're fit, then it doesn't require a tremendous amount of will for you to do that. Now, sure, are there times when, perhaps maybe you don't really feel like it? Yeah. But it's not like this like huge Herculean effort to push it uphill, because that's how you view yourself as a healthy person. And as such, you behave in accordance with the way that you see yourself. And the same is true in business and in life.
So, wow, that is so key. You behave in the way that, in accordance with the way that you see yourself. So that's exactly what you helped me break through, is this identity and the self-concept of I am smart. I have the ability to learn, and I've had a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of experiences that I've gone through, even though I've had a very rough upbringing. Because of that, I've always seek knowledge. So I've always seek people who knew more than me. However, having that thought process of I'm not smart was blocking my brain from really opening up and pushing through that barrier. So it's interesting how that played out. And I was stuck at a certain income level for years. I was hitting the 200K mark year after year. I was like, what is going on? And there was a couple things to that, like learning sales skills to be able to go out and get business, as opposed to relying it coming to me. So that was a big shift, and meeting Jose was huge. But then working with you really helped me just break through that barrier that was governing me. Like it was a governor on my mind that kept me at that level. So is this a common thing with the coaching clients that you work with, that you see that first, a lot of times, and I'm talking in majorities, I'm not saying everybody, but what is the majority of clients that come to you? What ends up happening with them?
Yeah, so there is a mechanism for doing well in business. I feel like business is a science. So there's like attract, convert, deliver. So in the attraction part, like I have to learn what to say and how to say it. I have to learn how to get clients. And that is a skill set. And that might take, depending on someone's level of commitment, years to really develop. And a lot of people get stuck there, right? So in other words, they never really commit to learning a skill at a very high level. So they get stuck, and that always becomes an issue, right? And they've maybe fluctuated 10, 15 deals a year, just maybe perhaps working with their past client centers of influence, but never really honing the skill set of selling real estate in high volume and attracting lots of clients in high volume. The second stage is conversion. So once we have those people in front of me, now it's like the listing presentation. So what am I saying? How am I handling objections? How am I closing, right? To be able to convert those into contracts. Then what I see a lot of agents get stuck at is the operation side, right? So, I was telling Heath, the guy on my team, that you need an accurate assessment of reality in order to produce a good outcome. So you have to see what actually is, not the way you would like it to be or the way you wish it was, but the way it actually is. And I told him, like, what has allowed me to produce very outsized outcomes, like 1% outcomes or 0.01% outcomes in the real estate industry, is some fundamental understandings of like what it is. And what it is that, that's really what's happening. So really what this is about is helping people to determine that you're a better person to put in an MLS than somebody else. And then it's about learning the skill of pricing property in high volume, like, so that way it moves, right? And that very much so is a skill from a psychological perspective, from a wordsmith perspective, a communication perspective. And then it's having operations and standard operating procedures in place that you can do that like a conveyor belt, like 10, 15 times a month. If you do that, you'll make millions of dollars a year selling real estate. But that's the fundamental understanding. Now, what's mixed in with that is what we were just describing. So in other words, if someone doesn't see themselves as somebody who makes $500,000 a year, they won't. Or once they start to do it, they'll start to self-sabotage it because they'll be like, oh, that's outside of me. Like, that's not me, sort of thing, right? So I find that people change for only a handful of reasons. Okay. And it's not listening to podcasts and that sort of thing. What causes actual change is that people feel enough pain that they feel like they have to. Now, we've had reoccurring conversations about particular things in your life, and sometimes you go back to them, but you've reached a point recently where you felt enough pain where you're like, that's it. So people will only change because they felt enough pain because they have to. The second reason is because they've seen enough that they're inspired to. So in other words, you getting proximity to Jose, perhaps to me, where you're seeing people operating at higher levels, and then you're inspired to change. The third reason is because you've learned enough that you want to. So that's part of one of the things that I would be doing if our bodies are the hardware, our brains are the software. So with coaching, what I'm really doing with people is downloading my software to other people. But part of that downloading process is not only conversations, but I'm pointing you to books. It's like I'm a shortcut to the library. And a lot of these books have had fundamental changes in my software. So by me giving you access to books that I've read and encouraging you to read them, it's part of the way that I'm downloading my software to you, right? So when people learn enough that they want to, and then the fourth reason people change is because they've received enough that they're able to, right? And that has to do with you showing up all the time, showing up to our coaching calls, showing up to role play, where you're receiving enough that you're actually capable of doing it. Now, mix that in with me having a conversation with you and breathing over you and your life and your experience. Like, hey, you can sell 50 homes a year. Hey, you can have 100 people in your organization. Hey, right? Because usually it takes somebody believing in us before we see it ourselves. I remember at the beginning of my career, I had a guy look at me and say, hey man, you could do 75 deals a year all day long. And I looked at him and I was like, really? And what I became aware of in that moment is that he believed it more than I did, which was pretty interesting to me, right? So that's what I see. And I see the main thing that inhibits us is just telling ourselves a story. Like we're not deserving, we're not capable, we're not this, we're not that, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm too small, that sort of thing. And what I've become acutely aware of is there are people out there that are doing everything that you want to do that are less talented than you. And the only reason that they're doing it and you're not is just because they have the courage to do it. So once you recognize that, and you recognize the fact that we have 27,550 days on planet Earth on average, the average human gets about 75 years. It's about 78, in the industrialized world. I'm 42, which means I've used half. I'm going to sleep through a third if I sleep 8 hours a day. So all that's just to demonstrate that there's not that much time. So with that being the case, when you couple that with the knowledge and understanding how quickly you will be forgotten when you're no longer on planet Earth, then it becomes like, why am I not aggressively pursuing what I really, really want? Why do I give two shits about what other people say or think? Because they're going to forget me in an instant. Like in 2 generations, anybody who ever knew me is going to be dead. So it's like, why am I not aggressively pursuing what it is that I'm after?
That's such a great point, that so many times that we're worried about what other people are going to think about what we do, and the fact that you're going to be forgotten within a couple generations, like that's only more fire to go after what you want wholeheartedly. And that's such a great perspective of, what is it, 27,000 days that you have on this earth, and you're 42. That's more than half if the average death is 78 years old here in America. So that's what's been kind of like weighing on me quite a bit lately, is like, shoot, I blew away 5 years in a relationship. I was messing around with some people that I thought were friends that were just tearing me down, and it's not worth my entire existence. That was a part of my existence, and if I continue with those people, then my life was not going to excel to the level that I wanted to. But why do you think me in particular, or anybody else out there who's in, let's say, toxic relationships, why do they stick around that?
Yeah, so we get something from anything that we do, even if it doesn't serve us. So I'll give you an example. Like I read a book called Life Strategies by Dr. Phil, and I used to think, candidly, I was like, Dr. Phil, like, what does he know, right? At the same time, you don't make $70 million a year by like not knowing what you're doing, right? So, in reading that book, though, the one thing I took from that book, which is very interesting, was a story, and the chapter was like, you're getting something out of it, and he tells a story of a woman who she had fluctuated in weight like 3 times, like losing massive amounts, like 100 pounds, and then she would gain it all back. And this was like a really, as you can imagine, it's physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally challenging to do that regularly. And you feel like you're letting people down. You got to change your clothes all the time, like sort of thing. And she's at her wit's end. So she's seeing everybody, psychiatrists, she's seeing hypnotists, like crystal people, like, anybody to try to help her with this. And she bumps into Dr. Phil and she's like, hey, can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I could definitely help you. She's like, okay. So she comes down the office and he sits down with her and he's like, so tell me what's going on. And she's, sobbing and crying. Like, I keep losing weight. I lose 100 pounds here or there and blah, blah, blah. It's so difficult for me. I feel like I'm letting people down. It takes a tremendous amount of effort to get it going again. He's like, all right, what are you getting out of it? Oh man, she got so angry. Like, how dare you? What do you mean? What am I getting out of it? Like, this is so difficult for me physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And he said, yeah, I appreciate that. At the same time, you're getting something out of it. So let me ask it in a different way. What are you afraid of? She had to sit and think about that for a second. And what she was really afraid of, what came to the surface, is she was afraid of getting attention from the opposite sex. So what would happen is she would lose 100 pounds, start to get attention, make her uncomfortable, so she would gain it all back.
Wow.
So that's what she's getting out of it. She's getting safety and security instead of dealing with the thing that she's afraid of. So what I would propose is when we're going to things that we know aren't serving us in some way, we're getting something out of it. Whether it's a substance, what I'm getting out of it is perhaps I'm disassociating from reality for an hour or two. So I'm numbing. What's interesting is I can't selectively numb, because if I numb pain, I also numb joy. If I'm going back to a toxic relationship, it's like, well, what am I getting out of that? Well, I'm getting perhaps companionship, or I get, I feel lonely, so it's filling that void for me. So you're getting something out of it, but if you can get to the root of what you're getting out of it, and behind of that is usually a fear, and if you can address the fear, then now I'm in a position of kind of reclaiming my control and my responsibility. So if you look at that word, it's like your ability to respond. Responding requires consciousness and awareness. Reaction does not. Reaction is like if I bang your knee, like with a little hammer at the doctor's office and your leg pops out. That's a reaction. There's no consciousness. There's no thinking there. There's no awareness. Responding requires consciousness and awareness. So what you're doing is reclaiming your responsibility, your ability to respond.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's that is so interesting that she was running away from the opposite sex, and she wasn't aware of this. That's the thing. When we're doing these behaviors, we don't, the root of it is subconsciously. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's just outside of our awareness. So like, we've had conversations about, that specifically, and it's like, yeah, bro, I know you have like a really strong desire for like family. And, some of your friends may feel that way to you. So that's what you're getting out of it. You get a sense of like camaraderie. You get a sense of like people know you because they've known you for a long time. You get a sense of, perhaps companionship, to deal with, maybe feeling lonely in a particular moment. So that's what you get out of it. At the same time, when we look at like, okay, well, what is it costing you? And there's an enormous cost there, right? And then you bring yourself to a place of choice where you can consciously and purposely make a decision and choose what you want to bring into your experience.
Love that. Yeah, it's the awareness factor, and what you did is help me self-discover by asking very specific questions
Yeah.
and bringing that awareness to my mind to say, okay, yeah, wait, what is happening? What
Yeah.
happens when I hang out with these people?
Yeah.
Why am I hanging out with these people? Like, I'm not benefiting. And if this is my life, it's not a matter of being like selfless, right? Because I think sometimes in my mind, like, I've known them for X amount of years. I owe them this, but I don't owe them shit. Really, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, they're not. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I could see why someone would feel like a sense of like guilt, and guilt though is underneath guilt is like I owe you some, or like, so there's guilt and there's resentment. So resentment is where you think somebody owes you something, right? But guilt is where you feel like you owe somebody else something. But both of those are manufactured, by the way. They're not normal and natural like other emotions that we feel, like happiness, anger, sadness. Those are natural, like rain and sunshine. Guilt requires a judge and a jury and a verdict, which is guilty. So that's manufactured. That's something that we create. Okay. So then you can begin to examine, like an exercise might be is like, I owe you, like you're journaling it, and then it's like ... Like, what do you think the IOU is? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To really get to it, like to get to the heart of the matter. Like, what do you think you owe someone?
That's such a key practice right there. Why have you not told me this before? Because, like, yeah, I mean, think about your relationships. If it's not serving you, first of all, if they're your friend, if they're actually your friend, they would want to see you succeed, right? They would want to see you be better. They want to see you work out. They want to see you excel in every aspect of life if they're truly your friend. Now, what I've noticed is that the people that I've had around me, it was not about that. And this was my big realization, was that it was more so about them and keeping someone below them because they were massively insecure. So that gave them power to treat me in a certain way. And I just took the abuse, which is, and you explain it to me, it's because of childhood trauma that I've gone through, where that's kind of my emotional home, I guess you would say. That that's what
your mechanism for kind of what is like acceptable is just skewed. So in other words, like if you had a experience in which with perhaps some love came like a lot of other things that really didn't serve you, then that becomes a mechanism. Is that's where you're like, oh, that's what this is. Like, that's how you do this. That's what friendship is. That's what other things are. And I remember we had a call, and I was like, hey, bro, like, I'm like, look at me. Like, I want you to really know that, like, you deserve relationships that are like, where people really appreciate your presence. They don't put you down. They don't talk shit about you. They don't, you know what I mean? And that was really like, an impactful moment for you. So I do believe that like business is a spiritual journey. I don't think it's a material one. And I think we start off selfishly, because a lot of us, 65% of us came from parents that live paycheck to paycheck. So we start off in like kind of survival mode, but that's like the base level. Some people never leave that. And then some people are like, okay, now I need to prove myself to other people through like status symbols or things of that nature. Some people never leave that. But as you evolve and grow, what it becomes more about is like because as I grow more, I can give more. And then it becomes about like, how can I serve other people and help them to grow and expand or do things of that nature. So, I think that's just part of that evolution. So you're just going through that evolution, currently. And I remember you came to me recently and you were like, hey, bro, about like leadership positions in the organization and stuff. And I'm like, hey, dude, in order to be like a really awesome leader, you have to lead yourself at a really high level. And you were like, yeah. That makes sense to me. So like it's, it's a process. And I think because of social media and because of all this other stuff, like it's skewed the time that it takes to become. Because we think it's like, on a weekend seminar, like fucking, and then I'm just going to become. It's like, nah, dude, like that's a process, And the way I like to explain it to people is like, imagine you planted a seed in a garden and then you stood over it with a bullhorn and yelled at it every day. Like, why the fuck aren't you growing? Like, you should be bigger. You should be stronger. You should be taller. Look at those other trees over there. They grew already. Like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Now, if you saw that, if I saw you in a garden doing that, I'd be like, bro, like, is Sean maybe losing Boston Marbles, man? Like, I don't know. Or if you saw me doing that, you'd be like, Aaron, dude, like, I don't know what's going on with you. Like, are you okay? Right? That's what I see people do regularly. And it's because they have a massively inaccurate assessment of time and how long it takes to become. We just want to shortcut it. Like we want all the accolades once I become, but I don't want the process of becoming, because the becoming process is difficult.
It's a longer process than I think we perceive it to be. I think we think, and especially here in America, with instant gratification, with Amazon showing up in 2 days, sometimes 1 day. If it doesn't show up in 2 days, we're freaking out. It takes 3 days to actually show up to the doorstep and we're freaking out, right? And at the same time, Tony Robbins always says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you.
Right.
Life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And fortunately, there's a higher power that's involved that has guided my life through, and you asked me, it's not the love that you receive. I didn't receive much of any love, bro. These guys were messed up on drugs and like literally standing up, sleeping. So they had no clue what was going on. Fortunately, I had other families around me. So that I want others to think about that. Think about your childhood and how you were raised and how you received love. And then think about the relationships that you're in. Are you receiving love at the same capacity, or are you receiving love at a much higher level? Because once you achieve that, I think relationships have a lot, and clarify me if I'm wrong, I think it has a lot to do with who you also become in the process.
Oh yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. That proximity is very much so power, and that you're one relationship away from changing your family tree for the rest of your life. That's been very true for me. My experience has been a handful of people, maybe 4 or 5, that have really changed my life. And, my intention moving forward is to be that relationship for as many people as possible. So like, in other words, the greatest thing that I can really possess is if my name is in somebody else's testimony. Right. And, I think that's what drives me. That's my mission and purpose at this stage in the game. And, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have a platform to really do that, for others. So I love what you're doing here, brother. You're in the process of becoming. I believe that those who shine the brightest were in the dark. And, just keep at it, man.
Yeah, I always say that steel was forged in fire.
That's right.
And if you look at the 12 apostles in the Bible, every one of them was jacked up. Everyone was a tax collector. One was killing Christians. One was, they were so jacked up. But the thing was that they needed Jesus. And also, what I also realized is that they could connect with so many more people because they went through the worst of the worst. They were at the bottom. So because they were at the bottom, and when they go to the top, they can relate to much more people in that process.
Well, that, and I remind people that, like, whatever because everybody has like something, right? So The majority of people do. So whatever you went through, like this idea, like things happen for you and not to you, like it's equipped you in some way. So for you, it's equipped you to be like more compassionate than others, perhaps. It's given you a strength that a lot of people don't have. It's given you a drive that a lot of people don't have. So I mean, it's served you in some capacity. So yeah, man. I think that people have a tendency to want to focus on scripts and dialogues, what to say and how to say, and all that's important. I want you guys to really hear me. What we've been talking about on this call is the inner game, and they're two separate games. And what I'm aware of is I don't want anybody that I'm in proximity to be a public success and a private mess. And unfortunately, that's what I see most of the time, right? So it's, just being balanced in the sense that, learning how to make money is fantastic, and I'm all about it, right? Because money buys choices, options, and freedom, but it's limited in its capacity. It can't take away grief. It can't bring people back from the dead. Like it can't take away sadness, right? It does pay for jets and tickets to Super Bowls and good education for your kids and good experiences for them and good medicine and
Lumineers last night.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like it does pay for that, but it is limited in its capacity. But to only I heard somebody say recently, I think it was Jordan Peterson, somebody asked him like, hey, do you think like we become less like godly? I think it was Joe Rogan. He's like, no, I don't think we have. I think we've replaced it with different gods. So like different idols, yep. Like, you know what I mean? Like money or like vanity or like, fame.
A lot of vanity.
Yeah. Like these things that at their core are empty. They're ephemeral in nature, like they go away. So, having a purpose or a mission, like really, serving others, being good at what you do, being studious, like striving for excellence in all areas, being a good steward of resources, investing capital so you can reclaim time. Like this is what we're about at the Elite Builders, and this is what we're about sharing with others.
Love it. And the inner game that you mentioned, so I hired you as a coach a year and a half ago, I would say, about that. I don't think we've had all that many conversations about actual skills, the whole thing. And because of that, because we have had some conversations, and you saved me $22,000 by one conversation that we had. I remember it very specifically. I was out in Laughlin at the time, and it was our coaching call, and it was almost like a 911 call, right? Because I was like, yo, dude, this is what's going on. This lady, she's used me twice, or she had me sell her mother's house, and then I sold both of her neighbors' homes, and she was going to hire this realtor who didn't even market her own personal property appropriately. She had one photo. She didn't because I remember I tried to get my client into this property, and this lady was the listing agent, and I couldn't even get in the house. So my client was willing to pay more than what that home had sold for. So I knew that this was going to be a disservice to my client. Yet I was like, you mentioned, you're like, Sean, why are you playing Mr. Nice Guy? Like, and what I realized is that it's not about being nice. It's about serving this client, because if she actually went with this agent, she was not going to sell the property for as much. I know this because she didn't follow up. It wasn't her main job. She was a part-time agent, so she doesn't have access to the things that a full-time top agent has. And so we had a brief conversation there. You said, stop playing Mr. Nice Guy, say this. And I was like, and we role played it, I think, like 3 times in a row, back to back to back, right in that, our little coaching session right there. I went and called her, and then I came back to you all excited like a little kid in a candy store. I was like, dude, that worked. And I would not have had that. That paid for my coaching for like 2.5 years
Yeah.
after getting that deal. So there are times when we do talk business, and we always wrap up the call with business, but the majority of our time spent is on the inner game, on self-perception, on the psychology behind it all. So I want to go into that a little bit real briefly. I know that you've had some experiences in your life with family. And that's a lot of times when people go into to become therapists, because almost like they're trying to figure out what's going on with themselves, right? So I don't know if that's the case for you. A lot of times that happens.
Yeah.
But you started reading the Taming Your Gremlin, correct?
Yep.
So once you read that, first of all, why did you start reading that book specifically, number one? And then number two, how did you get involved in the Gremlin Taming Institute?
Yeah, so really I came to it like kind of from a place of desperation in a way. So despite kind of producing very favorable outcomes, it took me 5 years to get to 100 transactions. And you would look externally at me and say like, oh, he's got a beautiful wife, like kids, like, he owns his own house, like he's making investments, like everything's great. Internally, my experience was not that enjoyable because I was perpetually like afraid I was going to lose the deals. I was afraid that I would lose my ability to generate the income. There's lots of anxiety and lots of kind of fear. And I was on a trip with my family in Amsterdam because my wife had a family member that lived there at the time. And my sister-in-law had a book on the table. And, at the time I was reading a lot, I still read a lot, but I was reading a lot at that time. And the cover kind of was interesting, Taming Gremlin, but I opened it up and what was interesting is inside what it said was, I hope this book will not lead you to riches. It won't lead you to like internal bliss, but it will lead you to enjoying yourself more and more each day. And I hope that reading it, accomplishes that for you. And that was like, wow, because like that was the thing that was a challenge for me, was enjoying myself. It wasn't producing external outcomes that were favorable. And I asked her about it. She's like, yeah, she said she had a fear of flying, and the person she was seeing for that told her to read the book. So I read the book, and then I did something that I never did before, is I picked up the phone and I called the author. And, I didn't realize he was like a licensed psychotherapist. So he called me back within 5 minutes. And I remember Carla was like, hey, Rick Carson's on the phone. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, he's on the phone right now. I was like, holy smokes. So I picked up the phone and, I talked to him. And I asked him, I said, hey, man, like this has made a really big impact in my life. Like if I get a group of people together, will you teach us your method? He's like, yeah. So I got a group of agents at the time, top agents across the country, about 5 of us. And he led us for like 6 weeks, like an intensive of sorts. Then, I was like, hey, I'm in this mastermind group. If we fly you out, will you do a workshop for us? And he did. And that was dope. And because I introduced him and because I put it all together, I got to have lunch with him. And when I had lunch with him, I said to him, hey, Rick, this is fantastic. What would somebody need to do to teach this to more people? Because it's really helped me a lot. More people need to know about it. And he's like, well, I don't really do that. And I'm like, that's cool. What would I need to do it? And he's like, well, you'd have to study with me and this and that. So I did all of that. I flew out to him a couple times. He flew out to me. We worked on material together. And then I became a faculty member in the Gremlin Taming Institute. And I'm more of a student of that stuff than I'm a teacher. So meaning like I came to it to really help myself. And then once I recognized that it was helping me, then I wanted to share it with other people so it would help them as well.
That's awesome, bro.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for Rick because, he poured into you, which then poured into me, right? And so you mentioned something before, I'm trying to remember, but basically like your legacy, right? So your legacy then has an impact. You don't know, it's a trickle effect. So you've impacted my life. Rick's impacted your life. You've impacted my life, and now hopefully, I impact other lives by doing that. But man, I love you, brother. I love you from the bottom of my heart. Like, you've changed my life in so many ways. I'm so appreciative. If anyone's out there who is struggling, even I would say outside of real estate business, if you have some other type of business, Aaron is so incredible in help guiding you through the inner game. If you're struggling with the inner game, if you're not having, if you're not experiencing life in a joyful and impactful way, I would definitely say reach out to them. If you're a real estate agent, reach out to him. If you're a real estate agent with a different company who's struggling in business, reach out to him. He has sold homes at a high volume single-handedly as one listing agent. I mean, you see a lot of people sell a big number of homes, but they have lots of agents on their team. This man's profitability on his business is high, so he knows how to get listings. He knows how to leverage. He decided not to do that. He decided to make a bigger portion of income and not have to manage so many people. If people want to reach out to you, how would they find you?
Yeah, so I appreciate all that, brother, and I love you too, man. So the probably easiest way to find me is online. So at Aaron Novello on Instagram, and you could DM me, and my team will get back to you immediately.
Beautiful, beautiful, brother. Thank you so much for your non-refundable precious breath today. I thank you, and I'll see you on our coaching calls.
My pleasure, brother. Be great. Talk to you soon.